All right, good morning or good afternoon wherever you are. As Jessica mentioned, Paul and Jon Pedder here. Go ahead and say hi, Jon.
Hi, everybody.
So I'm the one with the American accent. Jon's the one with the British accent. And basically, we both work for the Esri Disaster Response Program, which is we'll talk a little bit more about what we provide. But we both have a real strong passion for search and rescue, and particularly for using mapping in search and rescue. Jon and I would both rather be in the field with our boots on the ground, but we've found that the power of mapping during especially missing person operations is really important, and so we've decided to really put a lot of time and effort into that. But today, what we wanted to talk to you about first was the mission reporting system that the Mountain Rescue Association has rolled out and how we're helping to support that. I'll preface this with Jon and I are helping to configure this mapping system, but that we're not administrators for the MRA or anything like that. So we'll be able to answer most of your questions, but just keep in mind we're not speaking for the MRA today. So if we look at the history of mission reporting in the MRA, for those of you that are a member of the organization, it's typically been a paper type workflow. And each team collects mission data in sort of their own format, and at the end of the year they've been asked to collate all the data, basically add up the number of incidents and the number of hours, and then send that in to the MRA for them to additionally add up all the numbers. And at the end of the year, what you get are a few summary statistics, but really not a lot of information that can be easily explained to other stakeholders. So if you think about who the stakeholders are for the MRA, for one, it's the government agencies. Government agencies want to know where and when volunteers are being used for search and rescue missions. You know, and another stakeholder that I've been told is also people who are interested in helping support the organization. So for fundraising purposes, being able to talk about where the MRA is active and what they're doing is really important. So I've been informed that those are two real key drivers for why we're collecting data and why we're trying to do it in a way that isn't so locked up in spreadsheets and shoeboxes. So what we're really talking about is mapping. And I'll only say this dirty word a few times during our presentation, but what we're really doing is taking our data and we're using it in a geographic information system. And for those of you that work in your day jobs around mapping, you might think that it takes a genius or a wizard to work with geographic information systems. But what I hope to show you today is that you'll be using GIS without knowing it. And for those purposes, we're just going to call it mapping. The Mountain Rescue Association actually has access to what's called Arcgis Online. And what Arcgis Online is a portal for doing mapping operations. You'll see here on the home page that there's different maps that are made available to you. Some of them are just maps you look at. They're maps that you look at to get situational awareness about wildfires or severe weather or flooding. But you'll also see that what the Mountain Rescue Association is using this mapping portal for is for collecting geographic information, for collecting mission data, and actually making sure that each mission is put on a map. So this is it's really important to me that the MRA is doing this. A lot of the research that I've done and the work that Jon has done shows that, you know, by putting incidents on a map, we can learn a lot more from them. And so I think that it's really exciting that the MRA is doing this. And what we wanted to do here was talk a little bit about how this works. So the key way that you would be interacting with the MRA mapping platform is through what's called the Geo Forum. And all the Geo Forum is it's a form that you fill out for each mission. And the benefit of using this form is that it won't let you complete the form unless you put that location on a map. This is very different from just filling out a form and writing down a location. If you write down a location, it may never end up actually being mapped. You might be using your own local place names, and you know that may not transfer well to actually ever ending up on a map. So let's talk a little bit about the Geo Forum and show you how it works. So the Geo Forum is actually just a website. It looks like an application, but you don't have to download it. So if you see here, we're just accessing a website. All you need is the link. And to get started, you can actually click on the link here and watch a short video. But let's just show you how this form works. So the first thing you do is you enter in your team information. And so since John's here, we'll start with Sierra Madre. To make that go quickly, you can just start to type in SI, and it'll take you to Sierra Madre. You'll enter in your own mission number that your team or agency uses for cross-reference. There's a date picker here. Now, the form will automatically record when you're entering the data, but it's important here to enter the date at which the incident actually occurred and started. Then you can enter in the total number of hours, and this is an estimate. And this is actually really important to the MRA, is to really show government agencies how many hours of volunteer time that volunteer professional search and rescue personnel put in to their community. So in this case, we'll say there were 5 rescuers for 20 hours, and we'll say it's 100 total hours. And really, the rest of the form is very intuitive. We put little hints down here for you to help guide you through this. There's different questions here about how the incident was reported. And everything's in sort of a drop-down environment so that you don't make mistakes when you're typing. So you can see here this is fairly easy to use, and if you've ever ordered something online, this is just a similar interface that you might see. Keep in mind that these were the questions that the MRA Statistics Committee decided were essential. There may be other information that you want to collect or that you want to talk about on the incident, and you can do this in a few ways. You can add notes to the form, which is a great way to give a short description of the incident. And optionally, you can also attach a photo or report if you choose to do so. But the final step before submitting is to actually select a location. And this is actually really important. So we can do this in a couple of ways. If I'm actually right outside where the incident occurred, I could just use this Locate Me button. Now, this is working off of my laptop right now. But one of the things we'll talk about is that this form will actually work on any device as long as you had internet when you loaded up the form. So you'll see here on a mobile phone, it'll just adapt to the size of your phone. So in this case, I can actually say the incident occurred at my location or move the pin to another location. I can also search by common place name or address. Or I can type in latitude and longitude. You'll see here it would like for you to use the format of decimal degrees. And we guide you here to show you how that should be entered. For those of you that are using U.S. National Grid for search and rescue mission reporting, there's an option for that here. And for a lot of you, especially during search scenarios, there's UTM entry. And all that'll do is actually just plot the location on the map. And then you can evaluate if that's where you want to say the incident has occurred. And if so, you'll hit Submit Entry, and it'll clear the form for you. So that's really how the form works. And it seems like a simple thing, and you may be wondering why when I enter just 3 or 4 incidents for my team each year, why does that actually matter? Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and why that's important. Before we go there, though, I just wanted to remind you that there's training videos on YouTube that you'll have access to. And the first video there just walks again through this form. But also you'll see here that the mapping platform can be used for other tasks. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But just make sure that you recognize that there's videos here that are free for you to watch. And they're all pretty short, and John made them pretty fun. So, okay, so where do all these points go? And this is the part that I'm the most excited about, because what we're doing by providing points into the Geo Forum is we're creating a national map of where the MRA is active. And this is actually very compelling, and nothing like this has ever been done before by any search and rescue organization that I know of, especially volunteer. So where all these points go is they go onto a web map. And it really goes into what we would call a database, a spatial database. But that all sounds really boring. What we're doing here is serving those points in an application called the Operations Dashboard. The Operations Dashboard is an app, and it's an app that can be configured. In other words, this isn't search and rescue software. This is an application that we've configured to show and answer questions that the MRA wants to know. And so on this first page, we can see here the most recent incidents. So I can see on November 26th, Allegheny Mountain Rescue Group responded, and it was a standby. And I can see here West Valley on November 25th. And what this allows me to do is interact with the report, but also see where it is on the map. We also just have a simple mission counter here. Actually, someone must have just entered one today. We're up to 483 total missions. And we can also do other things like in real time, look at the different types of rescues that are being performed. So we can see here 16% of the missions are rescues on mountains. Another 12% are searches on mountains. And then rescues on mountains and search in forests and things of that nature. And this can be broken out to look at all the different types of incidents that are being entered. We can also look at what are the top 4 activities that our victims were doing. And it's probably not a surprise to you that most of the victims were hiking at the time, but you might be surprised at how many were related to walkaways or even motorized incidents. And so this is just a quick way to visualize the data. We can see here the total number of mission hours volunteered. I think for someone to be able to report that in real time is pretty fascinating. So already, you know, the MRA has donated 18,000 hours of their time, and that's 18,000 hours of time that, you know, the government probably wouldn't have the resources to support. And then we can also, just from a high level, keep a track of who's actually entering missions. So if your name's not on this list, it's probably because you haven't logged into the account. But we can see here a breakdown of which teams are active and also where they're active. So you can see here I can click highlight and see where those teams are actually doing missions. And then finally on this last panel, we make it easy for the MRA administrators to actually go in and look at statistics, like what are the number of missions that have involved rescue or injuries? 12 of them. And I want to see where those are. So we see a few in California, Oregon and Washington, Colorado and Arizona. And there's all sorts of questions we can ask here. Missions that involve air operations, 171 missions. And then if you're totally lost, you can come down here to our resources page and click on links for the training videos to take you back to the MRA homepage. And also we help you understand how you can actually download and back up the MRA mission data and sort of take it out of this platform and store it on your local computer. So that's the operations dashboard. So those are the 2 real main applications, the Geo Forum and the operations dashboard. And I hope that helps you understand how those two things work together.
I've got a quick comment on the operations dashboard. There's some videos I created to show how each team can customize operations dashboard for their own use. So rather than seeing statistics for the entire MRA, you can just filter that out to your team. So now when you're presenting or you need that data to either present to your team or other stakeholders, you can have your own dashboard which contains just your data, but then you can also add additional data for your local area. You can add points of interest, roads, and other data into your dashboard that might be useful when you're presenting.
So this is an example.
Yeah, this is an example. So we actually just took missions in Portland, Portland Mountain Rescue and Crag Rats, I believe, and customized the dashboard. So what we've done here, if we look at the top left map, as you can see, there's recreation points added. It's got the missions, but they've also added the ranger districts and some other information that they might find pertinent. It's just filtered out by their team, and it's very simple to do and create your own vision and your own dashboard so that you can track things yourself and use that for your own objectives.
So again, this is all presented to you in the training videos, and what we wanted to do today was talk mostly to what the majority of you will be doing is just entering missions, but realize that there's a whole other world out there of things you can do with the web map. And so these videos will walk you through how the web map works, all the way out to how the operations dashboard works, and we'll continue to add videos here as people have questions on specific workflows and things they'd like to do. For instance, you may not have thought about using maps to tell stories, but there's a series of applications inside this mapping platform where you can actually create stories about what your team does, and we can do this using pictures and location on the map. And this is something we've seen people use throughout the disaster response community to really make maps even more meaningful by adding photos and short descriptions to the map.
If you had something along the lines of a campaign search, say the subject was not located, but you've got a 5 or 7 day or longer mission that went on, you can actually tell this in an after-action review if you're briefing family or briefing other agencies, or just even an internal after-action review. You can use something like the story map to quite easily walk through the steps of what happened and the effort that your team and other teams put into that particular operation.
Great. And we also recognize that you may want to be able to just take the data out of the database and use it for your own purposes. Maybe you just are attached to your spreadsheets and you really want to see them, or maybe you want to visualize the data the way you're just used to in charts. And so this is the actual database. It's called a feature layer. And you can do quite a few different things here, but the one that you might be interested in is actually exporting this data. And so for those of you that use GIS software and mapping software, you can export this to a shapefile or a geodatabase. But for most of you, you can actually export this to a spreadsheet. And that's what a CSV file is. A CSV file can actually be opened up inside of Microsoft Office into Excel.
Again, there's how-to videos on how to do that. So there is step-by-step instructions on how to get that data out for your own use.
So I wanted to stop there and maybe address any specific questions about the mission data reporting system, and John and I will do the best to answer those. So if you haven't done so already, feel free to type in your questions, and Jessica will read them aloud to us, and hopefully we can answer those today.
Okay, we do have one question already, but like Paul said, if you have any related to this portion of the presentation, you type them in the chat/questions section of your control panel. So the first question is, how do we go about getting access to the msar.maps.arcgis.com website?
So invitations were sent by the MRA to every MRA team. If you haven't currently either received that or managed to log in, you're going to want to get hold of Monty Bell, and he's the administrator for the account, and he can make sure that he sends an email invite to you, and we can make sure that you do get online.
In other words, each team gets one sign-in, and we're tracking that here. This is in the mapping portal. We can actually look at who's signed in and when they last logged in. And so there might be, there's an account created for each team, but if you're not yet logged in, my guess is you didn't receive the email or didn't know what it was all about. And so Monty Bell would be the best point of contact for that.
Okay. Is a license needed for any of the software?
The license is what the Mountain Rescue Association actually has funded, and so they agreed in February to pay for the license for a year, and so that's what this login gets you. It gets you access to the mapping platform.
So basically, your membership to the MRA is entitling you to access to this product.
Okay. Is there a mobile app or in the works for in-field reporting?
Yes. So two options. One is this Geo Forum will actually work on your mobile device. If you're working without internet, you'll need to actually open this form up before you leave the world of internet, and that will work through the browser. However, what we didn't talk about today is ArcGIS Online gives you access to an application called the Collector, and this is an app that can be downloaded onto the App Store, off of the App Store or Google Play. And what this does is it actually downloads a native app, an app that you might be used to, and you can open that same web map and make the same edits. The advantage of the Geo Forum is you can open it up anywhere, and it's a little bit more user-friendly. The Collector app is also configured so that it can work offline. It allows you to cache your maps. And we didn't get too far into that today because we weren't talking about operations, but this is something we're starting to experiment with and for search and rescue, and we'll talk a bit about that in just a few minutes here. So to answer your question, the Collector for ArcGIS is an actual mobile app, but realize the Geo Forum will work on your mobile device as well.
Okay. What happens if multiple organizations report the same incident? Do standby organizations get mapped as well?
So this is a great question, and actually the MRA administration and the statistics committee has basically said don't worry about it too much. In an ideal world, you'd all be able to use the same, the same mission number. So in California State, we have a California State mission number, and we would all enter that. But I recognize that this is a new challenge, so you may not have protocols set up for that. And I think this is a good topic to send to the winter business meeting in February. But we'll let Monty and the team know that you have concerns about duplicate incidents.
Okay. What kind of support for this program is there outside of the MRA? There aren't a lot of mountains in Saskatchewan.
Great question. We're actually going to address that in just a minute. But before I forget, recognize that if you are a nonprofit search and rescue team, you have access to, in the U.S., just the Esri Nonprofit Organization Program, and Esri Canada has a similar program, and that allows you to access ArcGIS software at we would call it free, but there's an administration fee of $100 US, I believe 100 Canadian dollars. But that gets you access to the ArcGIS desktop platform, which we'll talk about in a minute, and also ArcGIS Online. So before I forget, great question. There is support through the nonprofit organization program. Okay.
How do you separate mutual aid operations where there are more than one MRA team involved, especially if the host team is not an MRA team?
I think this goes down to the same reporting questions that the MRA probably needs to talk about and address. What we're doing here is implementing the MRA's reporting structure that they asked us to use, and we're not actually administrating the MRA's the way that they address entering incidents, multiple incidents, and credits, etc. At this point, it's just enter the information for your teams and your missions, and you've got a big notes section there where you can add additional information for the notes in here. But that isn't something that we're sort of providing guidance on at this time.
Okay. How extensive is the reporting feature? I see that you were referring to SAR injuries and airtime.
So we can report on anything that's collected. So what we've got there are some simple queries set up, and we can easily add and modify those queries. If you're going to customize your own dashboard, you can go in and modify that widget and add additional panels. You can add additional reporting features. There's a lot of widgets in here, none of which require any programming skill whatsoever. They're just configurations. But if the data exists in the database, it can be reported upon. So a lot of that is sort of what is the data structure that we're doing, or the MRA is advocating and wanting to collect on.
Okay.
Something I'll mention as well is for all the teams that are currently managing their own mission or operations data in their own databases, if you are capturing spatial data with that, i.e. coordinate X, Y, there is a schema which we can help import your data into this database. What we're going to do is make that schema public up on the MRA site, and I'll provide a video on how the data needs to be delivered so it can be imported into here. But just because the MRA has this particular mission collection mechanism, it's not sort of usurping your own mission collections or operations collections that your team might be performing currently.
Yeah, the benefit of using the Geo Forum is that it's in real time. In other words, as soon as you enter the incident, it enters the database. It's fairly easy to use, but we realize it's limited. It may not ask all the questions that you're asking of your teams. The MRA really tried to agree on a core set of questions that they thought the majority of teams would have. And for a lot of teams, they don't have any software at all, and so this was a better approach to give them something, some capability. And so I think that's what they've done quite well here.
Okay, you guys actually answered the next question. It was about what to do with your existing database. So good job. The next question is they would like to know if you guys have Monty's email address.
We do. It's double top secret, though. Yes, absolutely. If you're a member of the MRA, I would think you should have access to that. But if you don't, drop me the point line, and we'll make sure that we put you in contact with Monty. Okay.
The next question is there an ability to store member data as well, or is the MRA just using the Esri platform for mission reporting?
The latter. At this point in time, it's just being used for mission collection and mission reporting. This is a whole new approach to how they wanted to try and capture data. We didn't want to overcomplicate it with adding additional features and functionality. This was just the initial configuration of the platform just for capturing the mission data. So we're not tracking team members or accreditation or any of that in this system.
Okay. Can latitude, longitude locations be entered in degrees, minutes, decimal minutes?
At this time, no. The best practice for entering coordinate data is typically for databases is typically in this decimal degree format. The reason is it's the easiest one to enter. There's no spaces, there's no special symbols or anything like that. What I would like to know at this time is how many people would prefer degree, minutes, seconds, and we can try to see if that can be added into this application. But my sense is that decimal degrees is the best way to do it, and there's actually, forgot to list it here, but there's a number of online converters where you can enter in degree, minutes, seconds, and it'll spit out decimal degrees. So in the short term, I would look some of those up. In the long term, I'll hope to add that as a feature. And I think what we'll talk a little bit about next is how this is just one way that Arcgis Align has been configured for the MRA. Other organizations like California Office of Emergency Services or FEMA or even agencies outside of public safety, they might be using the Geo Forum in a totally different way. And so this application is not something that's exclusive for the MRA. It's just been configured for the MRA. So we're working using software out of the box.
Okay. How can this application be used for just-in-time situational awareness?
So we're actually going to speak to that next. We've done some experimenting using ArcGIS Online, and other parts of the Arcgis online platform, or Arcgis platform, for doing just that. So maybe that'd be best addressed through the rest of our presentation.
Okay. Can you input and collect team data similar to SAR teams?
SAR team, I think they mean...
SAR teams, the application.
I think so.
I can't say that I am familiar enough to answer that question at this time. I'm not familiar enough with SAR teams, the app, the application, to know quite how it works and how it differs here. It's something I'll follow up on, though. So whoever asked that question at the end, they can drop Jon Pedder an email, and I'll try to follow up with you.
Okay. How far back in time can we add operations?
So at this point, we've focused just on 2014. The Statistics Committee has been taking a lot of requests for how can we archive all these other data sets. And the key thing is if it's spatial and you have latitude and longitude, it can be easily mapped. If all of your location-based data are in verbal descriptions, that's going to require a lot more effort and probably an intern or a volunteer to help do that.
Or probie.
Yeah, or a probie, or a college student.
Okay. And are there different map datums supported, such as WGS84 or NAD27?
So by default, the way that web maps work is they use what's called WGS 1984. And there's a particular projection that all web mapping platforms use, so Google Maps and Bing and MapQuest. And that's very specific. But if you're entering coordinates from latitude and longitude, you would want to make sure that it's in WGS 1984. If you're entering UTMs, that gets a little bit trickier. So probably a little too in-depth for today's conversation.
Bottom line, use WGS84. It's not going to do a reproject for you on the fly.
Okay. And are there plans for collecting initial planning point location and location found to generate lost person behavior, distance traveled, nationally, state, or county specific?
There's a number of organizations that are interested in doing that, especially outside the U.S. I know New Zealand Search and Rescue is very interested in that. And I know Bob Kester is aware of the project, but I also know that he's working on another way to collect that data. So it's something that should be brought up probably at the February meeting with the MRA. And I do think it's valuable to collect that. Now, that being said, you could be collecting that just for your team. I think local data is really important, even if it doesn't generate a ton of numbers. Collecting the point last seen and point found locations for your area or your region is really, really valuable. And you could be using web maps to do that today.
Okay. And that looks like all the questions. So I think we can go ahead and go on to the next section.
Did all those questions come from one person, or do we have
no, there was a bunch of people.
That's great. Great. So what John and I want to speak to next is the fact that, we're using this for a very specific purpose at this time, but that what we have available to the MRA is a mapping platform. And it allows you to think a little bit differently about maps. In a lot of public safety agencies, we've always thought about maps as something that a GIS nerd creates or someone in Google Earth sketches up. But what we haven't been able to really do up until now is empower the rest of the team to use the maps. And so we talk about this in emergency management, but very similar to search and rescue with, the ICS structure. Maps should be used by everybody in the organization, and this platform is really the portal for getting to that. One of the reasons maps are so valuable during disasters and even missing person search is that after a disaster occurs, the demand for information spikes very, very quickly. Right? I need to know the weather conditions. I need to know where the person was last seen. I need to know if there are any other hikers on the trail that may have seen them. And all these questions are being asked very quickly. but the availability rarely meets the demand early on in an incident. But what maps do is help kind of close this gap. If we can have a map or a series of maps that answer these critical questions, that's really going to help us meet the demand for information very quickly. And this isn't, this is a sort of a universal problem across all of public safety. But I think for search and rescue, we should be thinking differently about maps, not just as something we use in the field to navigate. So what someone asked before about, outside of the MRA, what can you do? Well, here's a great resource, and it's called mapsar.net. So www.mapsar.net. And what this website does is it talks to you a little bit about how you could be using GIS to help during missing person search operations. There's a quick video here that explains it. And there's 2 free downloadable ebooks here for learning just in general about how GIS can be used for wilderness search and rescue, and also a manual. But probably more important than the manual for MapSAR is the training. And so there's YouTube videos. If you just was it just
NAPSIG, Google NAPSIG, YouTube, YouTube. There you go.
And maybe John, you can speak a little bit to what it is that MapSAR does.
So MapSAR is using additional Esri technology. It's using the desktop product. It's designed to work completely offline in the middle of the wilderness with no access to any internet. And it's used for campaign searches to manage the assignments and the information collected. So the initial sort of push behind MapSAR was how to get field teams into the field faster with the maps and the information they need to get our boots on the ground and go look for the missing person. So that was sort of where we started, and how to quickly generate and print those maps and get them into the hands of qualified field search personnel. But then came, what do we do with the data that's coming in? So that someone's found a clue. Traditionally, that would get written on a Post-it and stuck on a paper map on the wall. 2 days later, the Post-it's fallen off the wall, and you might have lost the location of that clue. So some of the very important jobs that it does, that GIS does, is collect all of the ongoing data during the operation and puts them into a database. So now it can be viewed and collected and used much more efficiently than just a simple paper map. The paper map gets cluttered with people drawing on it with Sharpies and markers, and you end up with a big spaghetti mess. MapSAR really helps you manage the data, manage the mapping products, produce operational maps, briefing maps, and assignment maps. So there's a lot more to it, but that's sort of a brief synopsis of what MapSAR does. But it's just another part of Esri's product line, leveraging the desktop product and just using a sort of a template data model that we built specifically for search and rescue.
So we talked a little bit about how else Arcgis Online can be used in search and rescue. And so while MapSAR works in sort of a disconnected environment, it can also plug into this online platform. And so one of the best ways to learn about how to use GIS for search and rescue is to practice. And so at a number of different conferences, SAR-SCENE in Canada, and the MRA and ASAR meetings, what we've been doing is prototyping workflows on how you could combine maybe some new tools like satellite tracking technology or smartphones to be collecting data in a way that updates in real time. And so what we've been doing is configuring Arcgis Online and Operations Dashboard, teaming up with friends over in DeLorme to use their InReach product, and testing this out during actual conferences. I mean, we had a great time doing this in New Jersey last year, and I imagine we'll do the same in the coming year. So when we talk about situational awareness, this is a great way to track people in real time. Another way that we've been engaged in helping is through the Disaster Response Program. We were requested by a number of agencies to help in the Hannah Graham search. And this was an opportunity for us to take some of the traditional workflows of paper map products and add the ability of using GIS to look more at what else can be done. And so doing things like travel cost times. If this person was to go missing from this location, how far could they walk in a given amount of time? And so that's just one way to look and think differently about how maps could be used during missing person search operations. But then, you know, there was a question about situational awareness. And so situational awareness is sort of a buzzword. But during disasters, which is what we're involved in on a regular basis, you know, mapping can provide situational awareness in a way that no other report or spreadsheet can do. And so the Esri Disaster Response Program ourselves, we use Arcgis Online to create both public maps, but also to help agencies create their own maps during disasters. And so we have a home page here, which we'll share the URL for. But you can go here and look at different mapping products. The one that might be most interesting are the public information maps. And so right now in Southern California, it's raining, which is actually a big deal for us, partially because it never happens here, but also because we've had a series of wildfires in the past year. And so when it rains here, that creates a disaster for the towns that live below those areas. And so here's a map that will show us stream gauges in real time as that information comes in, and also where the long-term and short-term flood warnings are. And so this is a map that uses government data but updates in real time. And you might think about how this type of map could fit into your search and rescue operation. We want to go here and look at some of the severe weather incidents that are occurring. What we've done is made it possible to mash up with social media reports. So you can see here the weather on the East Coast with AccuWeather radar. And down here, for us in Southern California, we're actually getting a fair amount of precipitation. And we can go in and check things like weather stations to see what's happening in real time. So this is just a couple examples of how the Esri Disaster Response Program is known to support organizations. We do so with these public maps, but we also step in and help organizations map their own assets and their own missions during disasters. So the best way to get a hold of us is through the Esri Disaster Response Program website, which is just esri.com/disaster. And we do support missing person search operations. However, what I would encourage is for you to think about how GIS can fit in to your missing person search workflows before it actually occurs. But this is where you can go for help for the various types of disasters. And you can request assistance, and this is monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you just need some additional software licenses, you can select that from this page. If you need data or post-event imagery, but more often than not, you might just need some technical support or some consulting.
And these services are free of charge. You're not incurring cost when you're requesting these services from the disaster response team.
So I hope that this helps explain a little bit about what the Mountain Rescue Association has access to with Arcgis Online. And I hope for those of you on the call that aren't a member of the MRA, your host agency may already be using this technology. Esri is widely used throughout government agencies. And it might be time to go meet your GIS specialist and buy them a beer and ask them if they want to come help with your search and rescue team. So with that, I think there's plenty of time for additional questions. And I don't know if you have any on your screen there, but you can read them out.
We do have one additional question so far. If you have further questions, go ahead and type them into the same panel on your the chat/question section, and we can get to them. And I will actually switch the screen over to mine. Okay, so the first question is, let's see. For a while, George Durkee was talking about the potential for creating mutual aid guidelines with OES for GIS, trying to trying to get it more integrated into management functions, as well as building SAR GIS teams to respond to larger incidents. Where is that sort of thing headed? It seems like there are a lot of pockets of SAR GIS, but little of an organized, unified front.
Yeah, I agree. And so I'm lucky enough where I get to go around the world and see how this is being done. And I think in the U.S. we have a major challenge because we don't have a national SAR agency. FEMA and the Emergency Support Function number 9 does address that to some degree. But at a federal level, I don't see any efforts here in the U.S. In Canada and places like New Zealand and some countries in Europe, they actually have a national government agency that manages SAR, and they're beginning to get out ahead of us on how to do this. But what we do encourage is working at your, if you're a large state, working at your state level with your SAR coordinators to tell them that you would like some guidance on this. California State, we're making a lot of progress. John just presented at the SAR coordinators meeting in California. But probably the best example of regional coordination on using GIS is probably the Appalachian Search and Rescue Council. And that's really being headed up by people like John Ferguson and Eric Menendez, and they're all a part of a community that we use to discuss these sorts of things. So that's a great opportunity to mention a discussion group, which I will paste in the link to in the chat. And so far, from what we can tell, is that GIS and search and rescue has been very much a bottom-up movement. We do have one meeting each year, typically in California or near a national park and microbreweries. And we discuss these sorts of things and how we can help leverage our relationships with our government agency partners. One of the most important things we found out of the Hannah Graham search was that the volunteers had a better mapping capability than some of the local agencies. However, the state has access to GIS resources and GIS staff that could have been leveraged more closely had the two entities known about each other. So, long answer to a short question, I don't see any federal level movement, but I do see activity at the regional level to do this.
Okay. The next question is, how can Esri be used for pre-planning target hazard locations?
Great question. So I'm guessing that's more in, is that more in terms of a disaster response or search and rescue? I'm not sure from the question, but GIS is typically used in the planning phase, and that's actually where it's most widely used. And so, for instance, FEMA does sort of national level flood hazard analyses, but also local communities will model the impact of potential earthquakes using a solution called Arcgis. But if you're talking specifically to search and rescue incidents, I think the best step to pre-planning is to actually collect and understand where incidents have already occurred. And so that was part of what I had done in Yosemite, which is getting them to map their old incidents. Now that the MRA is collecting spatial data, you'll have access to incidents in real time.
And some of it really depends on what you're qualifying as a target hazard analysis. So you've got target hazard analysis that fire departments use to understand the vulnerabilities within their area of response areas. You've got target hazard analysis to do with avalanches and slope and aspect and where the locations are of high incidence of fatalities in your area, etc. So it depends what you can do with the GIS platform, especially if you're looking at sort of the desktop platform. You can configure it to do all manner of things. Some require a little bit more expertise in GIS than others.
Okay. And he did confirm that he was speaking specifically towards search and rescue, so I think that answered the question. Does the mapping software with ArcGIS support the additional NOAA layers or the other information you're pulling?
What we're doing as a disaster response program is we're creating what's called live feeds. So government agencies are really good about, in the U.S., are really good about making data available. but they don't always put it in formats that could easily just be added to a map. And so what we're doing is adding those, converting those data sets into live feeds, things that can just be added to a map, and we're doing that for you. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Is there a guest mode where we can let non-MRA agencies we work with, such as our local park departments, view these mission maps?
At this time, no. But what I would encourage is to find out if the agencies themselves already have access through their organizations, because what we didn't show today was that users from different organizations can collaborate through something called groups. And so, for instance, the Napa earthquake, we just had FEMA, California Office of Emergency Services, and the town and county of Napa all collaborating using their own ArcGIS online accounts. But for guest logins at this time, that's not a capability. If they're not an MRA member and they're not a member of your team, they can't get into your system.
Unless, of course, if it was a map that you're okay making public, you can go in, create your own map, filter out incidents, filter out stuff specific to that agency you want to share with. If you're okay with making that publicly accessible where no authentication is required, you can do that and absolutely share that with anybody that has access to that link.
Okay. And the next question is Robert Coaster getting all of the information which is gathered by you? We were reporting to his database also.
At this time, no. It's something the MRA needs to discuss with Bob. I do talk with Bob quite regularly, and I'm working with him to make his data collection system more spatial. As you probably are familiar with now, it's a giant spreadsheet, but Bob's doing some great work in finding grant funding to do this on a similar platform.
Again, this isn't our data. This is the MRA's data. We're just helping with the technical configuration and actually applying that in ArcGIS Online. Monty is the administrator, and the data is not owned by Esri at all. It's the MRA's data, so it will be their decision on how they share that.
Okay. And I noticed a filter on the Esri program for social media. Does this allow a user to monitor a particular hashtag or a thread for up-to-date photos, posts, and info in real time?
Yes, it does. It's limited by tweets and posts that are geolocated. In other words, it's not going to read the description and plot it on the map. And it's also not accessing the entire Twitter, what we call fire hose. It's sort of a sample of Twitter data that's out there. But yes, that can be configured both by the end user who's using the map and also the person deploying it. And that application is called the Public Information Template, and it's available in your MRA portal. Once you train up on using web maps and web mapping applications, you'll see that that's a template that's available to you. And who knows, maybe this is a great follow-up for another webinar.
Or another video. Maybe I can do a how-to video on that one if it's something that several people are looking for.
Okay, great. And that is all the questions. If you have any more questions that you'd like to get in really quickly, you can feel free to type them in while I'm wrapping up, and we'll get to them. If you think of other questions you have later, or you get other questions from your team or anything like that, you can feel free to email Paul or John at their emails shown on the screen. And the MRA webinar series hosts webinars frequently, so you can keep an eye on the MRA and PMI websites for future dates and topics. And that is also where the recordings of the webinar and the presentation slides are going to be on those two URLs shown on your screen. And you can follow the MRA and PMI on Facebook and Twitter to get updates about what we're doing and what webinars are coming up. So you can stay up to date with both the MRA and PMI